Green Party Parliamentary leader and former leader of the party, Elizabeth May, joined NetNewsLedger to talk about the upcoming session in the House of Commons.
With NetNewsLedger. Joining us by Zoom is Elizabeth May, who is the leader of the Green Party until the new leader is chosen. But you just had a meeting with Prime Minister Trudeau to discuss what the Green Party will need to support what the government is bringing forward in the throne speech. What would you like to share with our readers and viewers?
Well, the first thing, just a teeny little correction, because I'm the past leader of the party, but I'm still the parliamentary leader. So the three Green MPs, and when the Prime Minister wants to know whose votes he can count on a speech from the throne, I'm still the person to talk to. But our current leader is Joanne Roberts, and you're right, on October 3rd, we will have a new leader elected. So it's a little tiny little correction. But the main thing that, there's so many issues right now. It's not easy for anyone, whether a premier or a prime minister, to figure out what are the right decisions when we're seeing our neighbors and friends. The rates of COVID are still worrying and increasingly worrying as we are going into the fall. And Greens take it very seriously that public health science is job one. But what I encouraged the Prime Minister to consider was that as a government that wants to be seen as driven by science, they must take climate science just as seriously as they take COVID science, which unfortunately means for everyone that we're facing two crises at the same time. We feel it quite viscerally, literally here in BC. We're given one set of health advice that says for COVID, stay outside. And the other health advice says, for your lungs, go inside, because we have the worst air quality right now in the world. I mean, it's slightly improved today, but southern Vancouver Island has had air quality like Beijing the last week because of the fires in California. So what I really urged him to consider was that, fortunately, and this is the good news, the solutions to our economic recovery and the solutions to the climate crisis are the same. That the strongest economic analysis by world-leading economists is that we need to invest in renewable energy. We need to invest in energy efficiency for our buildings. Those moves are needed to rebuild the economy, and they happen to be really good as well for the climate.
Now, renewable energy, what kinds of renewable energy are you suggesting?
Well, first, just to look at it as a category, during the pandemic, no one was surprised to see that, demand for everything was down, right? But the International Energy Agency reported that the only energy product that had increased demand during the pandemic is renewable energy. So it's a world beater in that sense, and it's solar energy. Now, this is photovoltaic solar that directly converts the sunlight into usable electricity through things like very thin roofing tiles. This energy is now cheaper than coal. So it's both really efficient and cheaper and gives consumers lower prices for electricity. It's a winner every way you look at it. So the renewable energy piece, there's a lot of different kinds of renewables. We have geothermal. British Columbia could be doing a lot more with geothermal, solar, wind, and there's lots of different technologies for wind energy. There's also, of course, we could be along our coastlines. It's a little further out in terms of commercializing, looking at tidal energy, and of course, hydro. And not new big dams, but more run-of-the-river hydro, more capturing where we have hydroelectricity potential. So the category called renewable energy is right now where the smart money is going, and that does, it does create work for the people in the fossil fuel sector because their skills are very transferable, and they could be getting jobs right across the country in renewable energy as we phase out fossil fuels.
Now, one of the issues that's going on right now in Northwestern Ontario, and a group of Indigenous women have been doing a walk, is they're looking at storing nuclear waste near Ignace in Northwestern Ontario, which is just west of Thunder Bay and just east of Dryden. And they're feeling that is going on to Indigenous traditional lands. It's going to damage potentially the water supply, but also transporting those rods, the used uranium rods, is going to be a real issue. Where does the Green Party stand on issues like that?
Yeah, we really regret that the National Nuclear Waste Organization was established to figure out what to do with high-level nuclear waste, and to be a member of the decision-making body around high-level nuclear waste. When the federal parliament passed that law, I wasn't an MP yet, I would have been very active to try to stop the way this law was constructed. You have to be an owner of a nuclear power plant to help determine where you put the nuclear waste. That's the wrong group of people to have involved. They've got a lot of conflict of interest and self-interest. I completely stand in solidarity with the Indigenous women marching against putting high-level nuclear waste in their territory. We really should be looking at making that nuclear waste irretrievable. There's a lot of technologies that are more available than deep burial and repositories. And of course, we need to make sure we're not building any new nuclear plants, any new nuclear reactors to create more waste. We don't know what to do with the nuclear waste we have. So it's a very tough issue, but it's quite clear that nuclear waste tends to be targeted towards Indigenous communities because, I mean, I don't know that the term has been used for many years, but the term nuclear racism, and rather environmental racism, really applies, where Indigenous communities or people of color communities are far more likely to have be targeted for toxic waste or nuclear waste. And I think the Canadian society as a whole needs to look at the solutions around nuclear waste without having the decision makers be those people that own nuclear reactors.
Now, staying on the same topic, heading into the new parliament, one of the areas that's become very, very quiet lately is the topic of murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls. The recommendations from the commission have come down. Yeah. They've been handed to the Prime Minister, and it's almost like it's gone quiet. Is the Green Party going to let that issue go?
No, and I've spoken on the floor of the House of Commons numerous times to remind this government they've not responded yet. That the Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women's Inquiry reported to us more than a year ago. And on the anniversary date, which was in June of 2020, I was on my feet in the House of Commons demanding that we have action on the murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls inquiry. We know what they recommended, and the Green Party supports all of the recommendations. One of those recommendations, by the way, is now getting a lot more conversation, which is a guaranteed livable income. But we know that economic vulnerabilities were one of the reasons that women were more marginalized women, and two-spirited people were much more vulnerable. The failure of governments at all levels to ensure that people have affordable transportation. There are no buses running from many of these communities to larger centers. And so hitchhiking becomes the only way you can really travel in these communities. So and systemic and institutional racism remain issues, which is why a lot of Indigenous women and girls won't go to the RCMP for help, because they or members of their family have, through time, experienced sexual assaults from the people who are there to protect us. So there are multiple layers of why the Indigenous women are far more likely to go missing and be murdered, and we must not let that report sit on a shelf and collect dust. I will be raising it in the House of Commons again, as I have in the past, and I urge all of your listeners and viewers and readers to remain vigilant and demand that the government take action. I do talk a lot to the Minister for Indigenous Services, Mark Miller. I think he's probably the right person at the right time if we can push him. He's got a heart for these issues, but he's going to also have to have the backbone for them too.
Heading forward now into the throne speech and then probably a confidence vote, where do you think this is going to go?
Well, given the makeup of this minority parliament, the Liberals only need one opposition party to back them up. Sadly for me and for Greens, and for Canadians, I wish we had more seats so that we were able to be more determinative of which direction this goes. Our 3 votes will not go for a confidence motion for a government that doesn't take climate action seriously, that doesn't take Indigenous rights seriously, that fails to act on social justice issues. But we're not the dance partner they need. They only need to have the NDP support them, or the Conservatives, less likely, or the Bloc Québécois. Right now, Erin O'Toole is an untried, brand new leader for the Conservative Party. I'd bet you any money that the Conservatives will tie themselves up into a very neat pretzel to justify why they will vote confidence in the speech from the throne and still be talking about throwing the bums out. The NDP will take credit for anything that's in the speech from the throne that sounds like something they wanted, but they don't want an election. And the only party in the House that really would want an election is the Bloc Québécois, because they see their chances for winning a few more seats around Quebec City. But their leader, Yves-François Blanchet, just tested positive for COVID-19. So they may be less enthusiastic about dragging Canadians to the polls in a pandemic than they were a few weeks ago. I don't think we want an election during a pandemic. And one thing I did talk about with the Prime Minister yesterday is we know the Elections Act will need amending in order to accommodate safe voting in a pandemic. If we happen to have an election in a pandemic, in the opinion of the Chief Electoral Officer, the act needs changes. So we need to be able to vote at distance. This is a key thing that needs to happen next week. We can no longer be held hostage by the Conservatives, who have said that they don't believe we should be allowed to vote at distance. Meanwhile, their leader, Erin O'Toole, and I hope he'll be fine, obviously, but he is right now in isolation with his wife because of COVID-19 exposure. We need, as MPs, to be able to do our work, and that includes doing what the BC legislature is already doing, which is voting by systems like this. It's very easy to do. It's not like we cast a secret ballot in Parliament. It's a public vote, easy to do, as the BC legislature has already been doing it by Zoom. Once that's achieved, I think we can move ahead on a whole bunch of the work Parliament should have been doing since March, but we've been unable to do because of health advice and the Conservatives blocking distance voting.
Ms. May, thank you very much for your time, and I'll be wanting to talk to you in the coming weeks, I'm sure.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to speak with you.
Take care.
Stay informed and stay up to date. Hit subscribe, hit like, share this with a friend. Make sure you hit the little bell so you get notified the next time that we have a video up. Thanks for tuning in to NetNewsLedger.